Hello everyone, my name is Anna and I welcome you guys back to another English video here on the channel of Young Pilgrims. In today's video, we are going to be analyzing chapters 5, 6, and 7 from the book of Numbers. Today's video is titled Zeal for the Pure and Consecrated. Beginning now with today's chapters, we're going to start off with reading verses 1 to 4 of chapter 5. It says, "The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Command the people of Israel that they put out of the camp everyone who is leprous or has a discharge, and everyone who is unclean through contact with the dead. You shall put out both male and female, putting them outside the camp, so they may not defile the camp, in the midst of which I dwell." And the people of Israel did as the Eternal said to Moses. In these verses, we can see that the Eternal commands Moses to tell the people of Israel to put out of the camp any male or female who was found in a state of tameh, which is impure. Whether they were impure because they were leprous, or they had a discharge, or had any type of contact with a dead body, whether it was a dead body, an animal's dead body, or a human's dead body, they had to be taken out of the camp. As we have already studied in the previous books of the Torah, the Mishkan, or the tent of reunion, was in the center of the Israelite camp. And we learned that for this reason, it was very important that there wasn't any type of contamination or impureness around the tent or around the Israelite camp. And that is why it was necessary that the impure persons were separated from the rest of the camp, so they won't contaminate not only the people of Israel, but they also won't contaminate the Mishkan. If we remember in the book of Vayikra, also known as Leviticus, we learned the reasons of why the Israelites were contaminated with all these different type of diseases, which made them impure. And the first disease that was very common among the people of Israel was leprosy, where in the book of Leviticus we learned that this sickness was caused due to the lies, the gossip, the jealousy, and other type of actions that would cause this disease. The second thing that would also cause the people of Israel to be impure was the sexual impurities. This was due to fornication and adultery. Lastly, another thing that would make the people of Israel impure was death. In other words, touching a dead body, whether it was from an animal or from a human. And this was due to sin. Let's remember that the Torah was very important for the people of Israel to obey and fulfill each day of their life. Although this was not only required for the Israelite people in their days, but also for all believers in Yeshua nowadays. Nowadays, although the divine presence does not occupy in a physical place, we as temples of the Ruach, or the Spirit, must cleanse ourselves of all physical contamination, but above all, spiritual contamination. Because just as Yeshua said and told us in Matthew 15:19, verse 20, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. These are what defile a person." Continuing with verses 5 to 10 of chapter 5, it says, "And the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, when a man or woman commits any of the sins that people committed by breaking faith with the Eternal, and that person realizes their guilt, they shall confess their sins that they had committed, and they shall make full restitution for their wrong, adding a fifth to it and giving it to him to whom he did the wrong, or she did the wrong. But if the man has no next to kin to whom restitution may be made for the wrong, The restitution for wrong shall go to the Eternal for the priest, in addition to the ram of atonement with which atonement is made for him. And every contribution, all the holy donations of the people of Israel, which they bring to the priest, shall be his. Each one shall keep his holy donations. Whatever anyone gives to the priest shall be his. In these verses, we read once again that the Eternal reminds the people of Israel through Moses about restitution. And as we had already previously studied in the book of Leviticus, the Israelites, whether it was a woman or a man, whenever they had committed any sort of type of sin and they had recognized what they had done, that person, that male or that female, had to make a complete restitution. And this is something that in the teachings of Yeshua, he even confirms this restitution by teaching the believers that it is not only about making restitution, but it is our duty to do it with goodness as true children of the Eternal. Understanding that first it was our mistake, and therefore we should take full responsibility of it by doing a sincere and true restitution, and not only doing it because we may feel forced to do it. From verses 11 to 31, we can read that it talks about the test a woman had to go through if she had committed any type of adultery. The verses say that if a woman's husband had suspected that his wife had united herself with another man, then he had to take her before the priest and before the Eternal, so that way she can be judged with justice. In this case, the verses say that if the woman did commit adultery, then she was going to be cursed, and her consequences were going to be that she was going to become an infertile woman, and also she was going to be a curse among her people. But if the husband was mistaken and the woman had not committed any sort of type of adultery, then she was going to be freed from being judged and was going to be able to conceive children. In this portion that we see in these verses, the jealousy that the husband felt against his wife, it is known as the law of jealousy. And it is important to mention that this jealousy wasn't in a carnal or selfish way. It was actually a justified jealousy, since this feeling was actually put inside the man by the Creator himself. And although this part of the passage can be misinterpreted if we don't fully understand why the Eternal permitted this to happen, we must understand that the Eternal put this as an instruction for the Israelite people so that in a certain way it protects the family. And as we all know, the man, as the head and minister of his house, he has the full responsibility of being attentive to everything that is happening with both his wife and his children. Therefore, the father must be keeping vigil for that house so that his family remained pure. And if the father came to suspect some sort of problem within his family, then he had the obligation to act with maturity and integrity to put an end to that situation. Within this law of jealousy, as it's called, that the Eternal told Moses to tell the people of Israel, in a way, it becomes a shadow of what the Eternal did with the people of Israel. Since comparing the people of Israel with the adulterous wife that we can see being mentioned in these verses, we can read that she was going to take the punishment if it turned out that she actually did committed that type of sexual sin. And the husband, knowing what she had done, the husband still had to forgive her. And as we were mentioning, this becomes a figure of Yeshua, who took upon himself the curse, drinking those bitter waters, these bitter waters that are mentioned in these verses, Inside these verses, these last verses of chapter 5, we can read that these bitter waters was something that the woman had to drink in order to verify if she had committed any type of, or if she had committed adultery or not. And just as Yeshua took upon himself the curse, drinking those bitter waters in order to reconcile with the Father, Yeshua had to pay that high price for us to be rescued from that condition of adultery in which we found ourselves when we didn't have the eternal instruction in our lives. And for this reason, reason is that we shall understand that once we return to the Creator, as soon as we do that, as soon as we return to the Eternal Father through Yeshua, our response to his delivery must be with fidelity and obedience to the Father, since he has been kind to us and has allowed us to understand and know his word, which is life for us humans who are living in the midst of a world full of darkness. Continuing now with chapter 6, we're going to start reading about the Nazirite vow and also about the blessing that the Eternal gave to Aaron's sons. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 6 say, "And the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, When either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Eternal, he shall separate himself from wine and any sort of strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or any juice of grapes, or even eat grapes, whether they're fresh or dried." If we remember, due to the sin of the people of Israel with the golden calf, when they idolized this golden calf, the people of Israel had now already lost the opportunity of the firstborn of each family to be ministers. And since now the ministry had been left in charge to the sons, specifically only to the sons of Levi. Through this vow that we can read in these first two verses, the Eternal allows any Israelite, whether it is a female or a male, to separate and dedicate themselves to the Eternal for the period of time that each person determined to take. And during this time of separation, they would be like Levites, totally consecrated to the service of the Eternal. Before continuing with the following verses where we will begin to analyze what this vow consisted of, and at the same time we're going to be seeing what we can learn from this vow for our lives, it is first important to understand if this vow is still valid, and if perhaps the Messiah carried it out in the time or in the period of time that he was on this earth. And we must understand that we cannot say that this vow is in effect, because as we will see later on, after a person finished this vow, he or she had to offer a burnt offerings. These offerings were for the peace offerings and for the sin offerings. And since during that time the Mishkan was still in standing, it was still in the center of the Israelite camp, that is why everything worked under the Levites' ministry. And as we have studied, the Levites' ministry consisted of temples and sacrifices. But nowadays, due to certain consequences that these people had to suffer, this place was abolished. And now we are under the ministry of Yeshua, who makes us ministers of his kingdom, and therefore it has no literal validity. And something that we can learn from these verses, from this vow that is mentioned in these verses, is how our consecration to the Eternal should be like. Now, the question is, could it be that the Messiah made this vow? The answer is that within the scripture, it doesn't tell us specifically that Yeshua made the Nazirite vow. Although within the Brit Hadashah, we can read that he did heal the sick and did touch them. And if we remember, this was something that was forbidden, a forbidden act for those who decided to make this vow. We can even read that the Messiah raised people from the dead. And if we remember, this is something that also it was considered as impure, because if someone had touched a dead body, whether it was a human's or an animal's dead body, that person was now considered unclean. Continuing with verses 3 to 8, it says, "All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skin. All the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Eternal. He shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow long. All the days that he separates himself to the Eternal, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his mother, his father, his brother, or his sister, if they died, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to the Eternal is on his head. All the days of his separation he is to be holy to the Eternal." In these verses, we can read that the man or woman who decided to make this vow remained for as long as they wish, separated only for the Eternal. And also in these verses, we can read that these people could not consume any of the fruit of the vine, neither the wine, nor the cider, nor the grapes. And within the Torah, it doesn't specifically tell us, or it doesn't specifically tell us that we are forbidden to drink wine, but it is forbidden for someone to get drunk. But in this case, to get drunk. But in this case, for the person who made this vow, it was forbidden to partake of the fruit of the vine. We also read that this person was forbidden to shave their hair, because this was his cover. It was holiness in all aspects of his life. Lastly, they were also forbidden to touch a dead body, since, as we have already mentioned a lot of times, this represents impurity, death, and sin. If they did get to touch a dead body, then it was considered as a transgression of the Torah. Now, the question is, what can we learn from what it is to be consecrated? The first thing that we can learn is not to participate in the joy of the world, which is vanity. And this does not mean that the believer doesn't or cannot rejoice or doesn't have any type of rejoicement, since let's remember that the Father commands us to be happy in his holy convocations or his holy appointments, which we find in Leviticus 23. In addition, within our lives, we get to have many moments of joy, especially because of the joy we have through the Messiah. And here, the important thing is to know the difference between the joy that the Eternal gives us through his word and the momentary joy or the momentary happiness that the world gives, which is totally based on the carnal desires. Second, we also learned to live under the Messiah's cover in holiness, obedience, and justice, without leaving or deviating from his instructions. Lastly, we also learned to turn away from sin, idolatry, rebellion, and falsehood. And all this is summed up in not having a friendship with the world, turning away from everything that makes us deny our faith and diverts us from the will of the Creator. And although we are in this world and we do live surrounded by people that don't have the same faith as us and live in a rebellious way against towards the Eternal, we cannot behave or it is important for us to know, especially as youth people, that we cannot behave in the same way nor participate in the fruitless works of darkness that are found in this corrupted world. On the contrary, we must be light for the lives of others who surround us. Continue with verses 9 to 12, it says, "And if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it." Verse 10, "On the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons to the priest to the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall offer one for a sin offering and another for a burnt offering, and make atonement for him, because he sinned by reason of the dead body. And he shall consecrate himself that same day, and separate himself to the Eternal for the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb a year old for a guilt offering. But the previous period shall be void, because his separation was defiled." In these verses, we can read that if this person accidentally touched a dead body, they should cut their hair off and bring a burnt offering and atonement offerings to the Eternal. As we had previously said, we know that this is not literally valid nowadays, although yes, we can take it as a spiritual application. But we as believers, due to carelessness or ignorance, can transgress. We understand that we are not perfect and that we are in this process of sanctification. And although there may come to see moments where we ask ourselves, what should we do when we commit a mistake? It is important to remember that within the scriptures, it tells us that if anyone has sinned, we have a lawyer with the Father, and this lawyer is Yeshua the righteous, which means going to the Father through Yeshua, confessing the fault that we have made, and making an effort not to repeat it again, but purify ourselves through obedience to the word. From verses 13 to 21, we continue reading about the Nazirite vow. If we remember, we have already studied this topic in the book of Vayikra, also known as Leviticus, and this procedure mentioned in these verses within the book of Leviticus, we also read that this procedure was done by the Levites, and once that person finished with their period of consecration, it should now be delivered to the Eternal. In these verses of this chapter 6, it teaches us that what we consecrate in our life is for the Creator, for a single path, that is Yeshua. He is our cover, and therefore only through Him can we deliver our consecrations to the Eternal. The last verses of this chapter 6, verses 22 to 27, it talks about Aaron's blessing, or the blessing that the Eternal gave to Aaron. It says, "The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, Thus ye shall bless the people of Israel. Ye shall say to them, The Eternal bless you and keep you. The Eternal make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Eternal lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So shall they put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them." In these verses, we can read a blessing that within many religions, it is taken to be repeated over and over again without the correct acknowledgement. And it is very important for us when we read this blessing for us to understand that this blessing has a deep meaning, which must be taken into account when saying it. In order to have the correct knowledge of this blessing, I will be giving a brief explanation of what this blessing means so that we don't just speak and repeat out of ignorance as many people tend to do. The first phrase that we can that we can read in these verses says, "The Eternal bless you and keep you." And in this first phrase, we first understand that the blessing is not only associated with materialistic things, but rather the true blessing is that the Father makes us complete for His service, that we prostrate ourselves and consecrate ourselves to Him, to His service, in order to receive His good. And at the same time, that He guards our lives through the Torah and the Messiah, which we have already understood and we have already studied, that the Messiah and His Torah are fences of protection that preserve us in holiness, and that at the same time it keeps us firm as living stones in the consecration of the Messiah. The second phrase that is said in these verses or in this blessing is, "The Eternal make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you." Here we can read that it is mentioned about the Eternal's face. And as we have already studied in the other previous 3 books of the Torah that we have been studying week after week, we have understood that no one has seen the Eternal's face and that no one can see the Eternal's face. We understand that He lives in the inaccessible light, but in the scriptures it tells us that His Son has made Him known. In other words, Yeshua is known as the angel of the face. He is the one who represents the Eternal. Now understanding this, what this part of the second sentence means, or this second phrase of this blessing, it means that the Father shows us His Son, that He grants us the joy of knowing the Messiah. The third phrase of this blessing says, "The Eternal lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace." This phrase means that the Eternal Father shows us the Messiah, who is the way to the Father, the true light. And at the same time, it also means that when Yeshua was raised, we obtained shalom, which is reconciliation, fulfillment, and harmony. That is to say that through Yeshua, we are reconciled with the Heavenly Father. Yeshua broke down that wall that separated humanity and the Eternal, and now He has made us accepted. He has made us accepted before Elohim. On the other hand, the peace or the shalom that is mentioned in this phrase of the blessing is the peace that the Messiah gives us, which makes us feel whole and complete in the Father, having that communion with Him. Lastly, the fourth phrase that takes part of this blessing says, "So shall they put my name upon the people of Israel, and I shall bless them." And in this, it refers to the authority that the Father has over the children or over the people of Israel. In the same way, today, the Eternal's Ruach is directing us to all truth in our lives. And this is an enormous blessing for us. And that's the reason why we should be grateful to the Eternal for allowing us to have His word and to know the testimony, to have His Son's Yeshua's life as a living testimony for us as believers nowadays. Another thing that we can learn from these verses where this blessing is being mentioned is we understand the importance of blessing with understanding. The true blessing for our life is that the Father allows us to consecrate ourselves to Him through the Messiah, who reconciled us with Him, bearing our reproach on Him so that we can approach the Father without impediments and live fully with Him. Understanding this, we can now understand the great blessing that the Father offers us. And if we remain in it, then we can reach the eternity. Continuing with the last chapter for this video, chapter 7 of Numbers, or of the book of Numbers, it talks mainly about the offerings that were, in the first verses of this chapter, it talks about the offerings that were presented when Moses finished raising the Mishkan, anointed and sanctified it along with all its utensils. And these utensils that were anointed and sanctified along with the Mishkan were consecrated, it is to say separated for the service to the Creator, which was carried out by the Levites, as we have already studied, and which was the only tribe chosen for this service, or for the service of the Creator, the only tribe that did not bring offerings because their contribution inside the Israelite camp was not in a material way, but it consisted of serving through those offerings that the people of Israel would bring to the Eternal. The first thing that was presented as an offering that we can read inside these verses of chapter 7 were wagons, which in that time it was something that needed animals so that the wagon could walk. And the animals that were commonly used were horses or donkeys. But in this case, in these verses, it describes that the people of Israel were going to use oxen. In the verses, it says that 2 oxen were used for each wagon, and each tribal principal had to cooperate with 1 oxen, and 2 tribal principals were also going to cooperate with 1 wagon. Therefore, it was needed 12 oxen and 6 wagons. And in these verses, we can see a fair cooperation that the Eternal commanded the people of Israel to do, since there were no people who contribute more or less than the others. From verses 7 and on, we can read that the Eternal instructs Moses on how each Levite family was going to receive a wagon and the amount that they were going to receive along with their oxen. First, it is mentioned, or the first family that it is mentioned, were the sons of Gershon, who were going to be giving 2 wagons and 4 oxen. The second family that was mentioned were the children of Kohath. And in these verses, it says that they were not going to be receiving any wagons or any oxen. But later on, we're going to be seeing the reason why they didn't receive any wagons or any oxen. And lastly, the last family that is mentioned were the children of Merari. And they were going to be giving 4 wagons and 8 oxen. And seeing these numbers of each family and the things that they were going to receive, the amount that they were going to receive, it can seem as it was unfair for some families. But in reality, that's not true, because this has an explanation. And although the numbers were not distributed, or it is read like the numbers were not distributed equally, but according to the service and the position that each Levite had according to the family that they belonged to, because let's remember that each Levite family had different positions and different roles that they would cooperate or comply with in order to together complete the service for the Mishkan. And well, to understand this more, it is important that I give a brief explanation of what each Levite family was in charge of, what their role was regarding to the service that was done inside the Mishkan. And the first family that we can see here is the Kohath family, and they were their role inside the Mishkan. They were in charge of the holy things that were inside the tent of reunion, or the tent of meeting. And these holy things, or these holy things that were inside this tent and that they were in charge of were the ark, the table of bread, also the lampstand, the altars, and the utensils of each one of them would use. And all of these things had to be carried on the shoulders of the Levites of this specific Levite family. And for this reason, it is why this family didn't receive any wagon or any oxen. The second family that it is mentioned here is a Merari family. And this family, they were in charge of the harvest job of the Mishkan, which was the wood made up of bars, columns, bases, etc. And for this reason, it is why they were given more wagons and more oxen than the other families. Lastly, the Gerson family, they were in charge of the covering of the Mishkan, which was the curtains that were inside and outside the Mishkan, as well as the veils and other types of covering items that they would use for the Mishkan. And for this reason, it is why they did not need the wagons as much as the Merari family needed them. And for this reason, it is also why they were giving fewer wagons and oxen. And also, in these verses of this chapter 7, we also read the following offerings that were presented within, or that we can read being presented inside this chapter. The offerings that were mentioned was the Holocaust offering, the atonement offering, the peace offering, and the oblation offering. And if you guys have studied along with us for a while now, ever since we started doing our Torah videos weekly, we have already studied in more detail these offerings in the book of Leviticus, chapters 1-6. So if you guys want to know more about this process, or about the process of these offerings and how they would work and for what reason they were given, then I invite you guys to watch the link of the video that is down in the description of this video, so you guys may have more information about it. And going back to explaining the last verses of this chapter 7, we can read that each tribal principal would represent the tribe that they were in charge of. That way, he would represent the offering of the altar through the Levites, and in that way, the people of Israel could have communion with the Creator through each and every one of those offerings that we have studied, that they were a way of getting closer to the Father. And in this, we can read that the inauguration of the altar was going to begin. Each and every one of the tribes were going to start presenting their offerings following an order that we can see from the beginning, where the days were now counted. And finally, in the last verses of this chapter 7, lastly, we read about an inventory of all the offerings that were brought by each tribal principal. And well, this is all for today's video. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you learned something from this video. If you have any questions or comments or any concerns, then you may leave them down in the comment section down below. Thank you once again for your time and have a good day. Bye.